The morning of August 15th started like any other summer day. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in engineering, and I thought I knew everything about my family. How wrong I was. We had planned a family trip to visit my grandmother in the countryside, something we did every year since I was a child. My mother, Sarah, had been unusually cheerful that morning, humming while she packed sandwiches for the train ride. My father, Robert, kept checking his watch obsessively, and my younger sister, Emma, wouldn't make eye contact with me during breakfast. I attributed their strange behavior to excitement about the trip. The train station was crowded that Saturday morning. Families with screaming children, business travelers with their laptops, elderly couples holding hands. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries from the station cafe mixed with the metallic scent of the trains. Platform 7 was where our train would depart at 10:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I checked my phone when we arrived at 10:30. "I need to use the restroom before we board," I announced, hoisting my backpack higher on my shoulder. My mother's eyes flickered with something I couldn't identify at the time. Now I know it was guilt mixed with determination. "Make it quick, honey," she said, her voice tight. "The train won't wait." I nodded and headed toward the bathrooms at the far end of the station. The line was surprisingly long, and I found myself tapping my foot impatiently, watching the clock tick away. 10:35, 10:38, 10:42. When I finally finished and rushed back to platform 7, my heart was pounding. I was cutting it close. But when I reached our meeting spot, they were gone. I scanned the platform frantically. Surely they had boarded already. The train was still there, its doors open, the conductor checking his watch. I ran toward it, searching each window for familiar faces. Nothing. I jumped aboard and walked through every single car, my chest tightening with each empty seat I passed. They weren't there. Confused and beginning to panic, I jumped back off the train just as the doors started closing. The conductor gave me an odd look, but I was already running back to where we had been standing. That's when I saw it. My suitcase. Standing upright next to a support beam, like a monument to abandonment. Next to it was a note, weighed down by a small rock. My hands trembled as I picked it up and read my mother's handwriting. "Marcus, you're not part of this anymore. Don't try to follow us. You'll understand eventually. The apartment is paid through the end of the month. After that, you're on your own. Mom." I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. This had to be a joke, some kind of cruel prank. But as I looked around the emptying platform, reality crashed over me like a wave of ice water. My family had deliberately abandoned me at this train station. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, clutching that note, watching trains come and go. People brushed past me, annoyed that I was blocking the walkway, but I couldn't move. My mind was racing through every interaction from the past few weeks, searching for clues I had missed. My father had been distant lately, taking calls in his office with the door closed. My mother had been cleaning out the attic, boxing up old photo albums and childhood toys. Emma had asked me strange questions about whether I remembered being adopted. I had laughed it off because I wasn't adopted. I looked exactly like my father, same dark hair, same green eyes, same crooked smile. Or so I thought. Finally, I forced myself to move. I grabbed my suitcase and walked through the station in a daze, out onto the busy street. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address, the apartment I shared with my college roommate, David. The 30-minute ride passed in silence as I stared out the window, the note crumpled in my fist. When I got home, David was in the kitchen making lunch. His cheerful greeting died on his lips when he saw my face. "Marcus. Man, what happened? Weren't you supposed to be gone for 2 weeks?" I couldn't speak. I just handed him the note. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to anger as he read. "What the hell? This doesn't make sense. What do they mean you're not part of this?" "I don't know," I finally managed, my voice hoarse. "I have no idea what's happening." That night, I tried calling every member of my family. My mother's phone went straight to voicemail. My father's rang and rang with no answer. Emma's was disconnected entirely. I sent text messages that showed as delivered but never read. I even tried calling my grandmother, but her phone just rang endlessly into the void. By midnight, I was sitting on my bed surrounded by old photo albums I had pulled from my closet. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations to the beach. Every photo showed a happy family. Me as a gap-toothed 7-year-old blowing out candles. Emma and me building sandcastles. Our parents smiling behind us, their hands on our shoulders. What had changed? What had I done? The next morning, I decided to go to the house. My childhood home where my parents still lived. I needed answers, and I would get them one way or another. The house was in the suburbs, a 40-minute drive from my apartment. I borrowed David's car and made the journey with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The house looked exactly as it always had. The blue shutters, the white picket fence, my mother's rose garden in full bloom. But when I tried my key in the lock, it didn't work. They had changed the locks. I rang the doorbell. Knocked loudly. Shouted through the mail slot. A neighbor I had known since childhood, Mrs. Patterson, came out of her house with a concerned expression. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I live here," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I realized they weren't true anymore. "I mean, this is my parents' house. Are they home?" Mrs. Patterson's face fell. "Oh honey, they left yesterday. Told me they were moving. Gave me their forwarding address for any mail, but they said you already knew about the move." Moving. The world tilted. Moving where? I'm not supposed to say. Your mother was very specific about that. She looked uncomfortable, wringing her hands. "I'm sorry, Marcus. This seems like a family matter I shouldn't be involved in." She retreated into her house, leaving me standing on the sidewalk. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had erased me. The next 2 weeks were the darkest of my life. I barely ate, barely slept. David tried to help, but what could he do? My family had vanished, and I had no legal recourse. I was an adult. They weren't obligated to tell me where they went or why they had cut me off. But I couldn't let it go. I needed to understand. I started with the obvious. Social media. My mother's Facebook page was deleted. My father never had social media, but his LinkedIn showed he had quit his job at the accounting firm 3 weeks ago. Emma's Instagram was gone. It was as if they were systematically removing themselves from my life. Then I remembered something. When I was in high school, my parents had installed a security camera system around the house. My father was paranoid about break-ins after our neighborhood had a string of burglaries. Those cameras backed up to a cloud service. I still had the login credentials saved on my old laptop. It took me hours to find the laptop in a box of old college supplies, and another hour to remember the password. But when I finally accessed the security footage, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I scrolled back to the week before the train station incident. The cameras showed normal family life. My parents coming and going, Emma leaving for her summer job at the local bookstore. But then, 5 days before they abandoned me, there was a visitor. A man I had never seen before arrived at the house in the evening. He was tall, maybe in his late 50s, with gray hair and an expensive suit. My parents let him in immediately, as if they had been expecting him. The angle of the camera didn't capture much of the conversation, but I could see through the front window into the living room. They talked for hours. My mother cried at one point. My father looked angry, then resigned. Emma sat very still, her face pale. When the man left, he was carrying something. I zoomed in as much as the grainy footage would allow. It looked like documents. A folder of some kind. The next day, I noticed on the footage that my parents started packing. Boxes appeared in the living room. My mother took down family photos from the walls. My father made countless phone calls. And through it all, they acted completely normal when I came over for dinner that night, the last dinner we had together before the train station. I had sat at that table, eating my mother's lasagna, joking with Emma about her crush on a customer at the bookstore, completely oblivious to the fact that they were planning to abandon me in less than a week. I needed to find out who that man was. I took screenshots of the best images of him from the security footage and did a reverse image search. Nothing. Then I had an idea. I called my father's former secretary at the accounting firm. Her name was Diane, and she had always been kind to me when I visited my father's office as a kid. Diane. This is Marcus Thompson. Robert Thompson's son. There was a pause. Marcus. I'm not supposed to talk to you. My heart sank. He told you that? He sent an email to the entire office before he quit. Said that if you called or came by, we were to tell you nothing. I'm sorry, honey. I don't know what happened between you and your family, but... Please, I interrupted, desperation creeping into my voice. I need to know who visited my father at home about 10 days ago. Tall man, gray hair, expensive suit. He came in the evening and left with documents. Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a whisper, that sounds like Richard Castellano. He's a private investigator. Very expensive, very discreet. Works mostly for wealthy families dealing with delicate matters. What kind of delicate matters? Inheritance disputes, paternity cases, family secrets that could ruin reputations. Another pause. Marcus, whatever he found out, it scared your father. I saw Robert the day after that man visited. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. After I hung up with Diane, I searched for Richard Castellano online. His website was professional and vague, offering services in discreet family investigations and confidential genealogical research. There was a contact form, but I doubted he would talk to me. I tried anyway. I sent him a message explaining that my family had hired him, that they had subsequently abandoned me, and that I needed to know what he had discovered. I didn't expect a response. But 3 days later, he called me. Mr. Thompson. His voice was deep and measured. I received your message. I'm calling against my better judgment because I believe you deserve some answers, though I cannot share the details of my investigation with you. That would violate client confidentiality. Then why call at all? I asked, frustration boiling over. Because I can point you in a direction. Your parents hired me to investigate a claim made by someone from your father's past. This claim, once verified, had significant implications for your family's inheritance. Specifically, an inheritance from your paternal grandfather who passed away 3 months ago. My grandfather. I had been close with him before he died. He had been a successful businessman who owned a chain of hardware stores across the state. His estate was worth several $1 million. At the funeral, he had pulled me aside and told me that I would be well taken care of in his will. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. I was grieving. What does my grandfather's inheritance have to do with me being abandoned? I cannot say more, Mr. Thompson, but I suggest you obtain a copy of your grandfather's will. It's public record now that the estate is in probate. The answers you seek are in those documents. He hung up before I could ask anything else. The next day, I went to the county courthouse where my grandfather's estate was being handled. Public records meant I had every right to see the will, even if my family didn't want me to. The clerk helped me locate the file, and I sat in a small room with harsh fluorescent lighting, reading the most important document of my life. My grandfather had left his entire estate to be divided equally among his biological grandchildren. Emma was named specifically. I was not. Instead, there was a clause that stated, "My grandson Marcus Thompson is to receive nothing from this estate, as recent genetic testing has confirmed he is not biologically related to the Thompson family." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Not biologically related. I read it again and again, but the meaning didn't change. I wasn't a Thompson. I wasn't my father's son. Everything I knew about my identity was a lie. But there was more. Attached to the will was a document from the genetic testing company my grandfather had used. It showed that a DNA sample had been taken from me without my knowledge, probably from a drinking glass or a hairbrush, and compared against my father's DNA. The results were definitive. Zero genetic match. I was not Robert Thompson's biological son. The document also referenced another finding. My DNA had been run through a genealogical database, the kind people use to find relatives and build family trees. And there was a match. A very strong match. My biological father was a man named James Carraway. And according to the investigators' notes, James Carraway was very much alive and living 3 states away. It took me 4 days to work up the courage to contact James Carraway. 4 days of processing the fact that everything I knew about my life was false. I spent hours staring at the genealogy report, looking at the 99.9% paternity match, trying to reconcile this stranger with the concept of father. I found him on Facebook, a high school teacher in Colorado, 51 years old, with a warm smile and photos of hiking trips and his golden retriever. He looked nothing like me. Where I had dark hair and green eyes, he was blonde and blue-eyed. But genetics work in mysterious ways, and the DNA didn't lie. I sent him a message. I told him everything: the train station, the abandonment, the investigation, the DNA test. I attached a copy of the genetic testing results. Then I waited, my heart pounding, for a response that might never come. He replied within an hour. "Marcus, I've been hoping for this day for 23 years. Your mother and I need to talk. Can you call me?" When I heard his voice on the phone, something in my chest unlocked. He sounded kind, almost relieved. He told me a story I never could have imagined. 24 years ago, my mother Sarah had been engaged to James Carraway. They were in love, planning a wedding, building a life together. But 3 months before the wedding, they had a massive fight about something James couldn't even remember now. Sarah broke off the engagement and, in a moment of anger and hurt, slept with Robert Thompson, a man she had dated briefly in college. She got pregnant. Me. Sarah panicked. She loved James, not Robert, but she couldn't tell James the truth without destroying everything. So she lied. She told James she needed time to think about their relationship and maybe they should take a break. Then she went to Robert and told him she was pregnant with his child, that she had made a mistake leaving him, and asked if they could try again. Robert, who had never stopped loving Sarah, agreed immediately. They got married quickly, before anyone could do the math on the pregnancy. James, heartbroken, moved to Colorado to start over. Sarah convinced herself that Robert was my father, that the timing worked out, that her lie had become truth through sheer force of will. For 23 years, that lie held. Robert raised me as his own son, never suspecting. Sarah buried the truth so deep she almost believed it herself. Emma was born 2 years later, Robert's biological daughter, and we became a family. Until my grandfather got sick. When the old man was dying, he wanted to update his will. He was a meticulous person who didn't trust easily, and something about the family dynamics had always bothered him. Maybe it was that I looked nothing like any Thompson who came before. Maybe it was intuition. Whatever the reason, he ordered DNA tests for both Emma and me, telling my parents it was a simple health screening to check for genetic conditions. The results destroyed everything. "Your parents had a choice," James told me on the phone, his voice thick with emotion. "They could have told you the truth, welcomed you into this new reality, and helped you understand. Instead, they chose the inheritance. They chose the money and the comfort of their lie. Because that's what it came down to. If my parents acknowledged me as part of the family, they would have to explain the affair, the deception, the 23 years of lying to Robert. The will was clear, only biological grandchildren would inherit. Emma would get millions. I would get nothing. But more than that, the scandal would ruin Robert's reputation in their small community. Everyone would know he had raised another man's child, that his wife had deceived him from the very beginning. So they chose to erase me instead. "I want to meet you," James said. "If you're willing. I've missed 23 years of your life, Marcus. I don't want to miss any more." 3 weeks later, I flew to Colorado. James picked me up at the airport, and when I saw him standing there with a sign that said, "Welcome home, Marcus," I broke down. This stranger, this man whose DNA I shared but whose life I knew nothing about, hugged me like I was the most precious thing in the world. We spent a week together. He showed me photos of my grandparents, his parents, who had passed away years ago but who would have loved me. He told me stories about my mother from before I was born, when she was young and in love and not yet buried under the weight of her own lies. He introduced me to his sister, my biological aunt, who cried when she met me and said I had my grandmother's smile. I learned that I had cousins in Colorado, a whole extended family who welcomed me immediately. James had never married, never had other children. "I think part of me always knew," he said one night over dinner. "I think I was waiting for you. But I couldn't just slot into this new life and forget the old one." I was angry. Furious at my mother for lying, at Robert for going along with the abandonment, at Emma for not standing up for me. I was grieving the family I thought I had while trying to build a relationship with the family I actually had. James understood. "Take your time," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." When I returned home, I made a decision. I was going to confront them. Not for closure. I knew I might never get that. But because they needed to know they hadn't destroyed me. They needed to see that I had found the truth and that I was building a life that didn't include them. I hired my own private investigator to find where they had moved. It wasn't cheap, but David helped me come up with the money. Within a week, I had an address, a small town in Maine, far from anyone who knew their story. They had bought a house with cash, probably my grandfather's inheritance money. They had new jobs, a new life, a clean slate. Except I was about to crash into that slate like a wrecking ball. I drove to Maine on a Friday afternoon. The house was nice, a renovated colonial with a big yard and a view of the water. Very expensive. Blood money, I thought bitterly. I sat in my rental car for 20 minutes, gathering courage, before walking up to the front door and ringing the bell. My mother answered. The color drained from her face when she saw me. "Marcus," she whispered. "Hi, Mom." The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "Can I come in? Or are you going to abandon me on the doorstep this time?" She stood frozen for a moment, then stepped aside. The house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh paint. New life, new smell, same old lies. Robert was in the living room, reading a newspaper. He looked up when I entered, and I saw fear flash across his face. Emma was there too, curled up on the couch with a book. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "How did you find us?" Robert asked, his voice cold. "Does it matter?" I pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. "I know everything. James Carraway sends his regards, by the way. He's a great guy. Better than you." My mother made a small, wounded sound. Emma finally looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "You weren't supposed to find out," my mother said weakly. "We thought if we made a clean break, you could move on. Build your own life." I laughed, a harsh sound that made them all flinch. "Move on? You abandoned me at a train station with a note. You changed the locks on the house I grew up in. You erased me from your lives for money." "It's not about the money," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Grandfather's will was very clear. Emma gets everything. I get nothing. And God forbid anyone in your precious small town finds out that Robert Thompson raised another man's son. Can't have that scandal, can we?" "Marcus, please," Emma started, but I cut her off. "You knew. At least a week before the train station, you all knew. And you sat across from me at dinner, smiled at my jokes, pretended everything was fine. That's what hurts the most. Not the DNA, not the money. The cowardice." The room fell silent. My mother was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. Robert looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. Emma hugged herself, her book forgotten. "I came here to tell you something," I continued, standing up. "You didn't break me. You thought abandoning me would be the end of my story, but it was just the beginning. I have a father now. A real one who actually wants me. I have a family in Colorado who didn't need a DNA test to love me. I have friends who stood by me when you wouldn't. You gave up a son for an inheritance, and you're going to have to live with that for the rest of your lives. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. I'm changing my name. I'm going to be Marcus Carraway. I don't want anything that ties me to the Thompson family. You can keep your money, your house, your new life. I'll build my own. I left them sitting in their beautiful new house, surrounded by their beautiful new things, and I've never looked back. 6 months later, I was legally Marcus Carraway. James helped me pay for the name change, and we celebrated with a small party at his house in Colorado. My aunt made a cake. My cousins gave speeches about how happy they were to have me in the family. David flew out from our apartment back home, and we laughed and told stories late into the night. I still have moments where I grieve the family I thought I had. I see fathers and sons together and feel that old ache. I wonder sometimes what Emma is doing, whether she thinks about me. But then I look at James, at this man who waited 23 years for a second chance at fatherhood, and I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. My mother sends emails occasionally. I don't read them. Robert tried to call once on my birthday. I blocked the number. They made their choice at that train station, and I've made mine. The abandoned boy from Platform 7 is gone. Marcus Carraway is building something better from the ashes. And that's my story. The day my family left me at a train station, they thought they were ending something. Instead, they freed me to become who I was always meant to be.